Hi, everybody, and welcome to A Closer Look, an introduction to writing a critical literary analysis. We've been talking about how to write a critical literary analysis, and as you are working on yours, I wanted to take just a minute to review some of the things we've already discussed and clarify some things that people have been having questions about with this assignment. So we're going to take a closer look at it. Let's start with what is a critical literary analysis. And we might call it a critical analysis, a literary analysis. For our purposes, we're using those terms interchangeably. So a critical literary analysis is an essay in which you make and support an argument with examples from a literary text. So you're making an argument about the text and you're using examples from it to support that argument. Sometimes it helps to understand a piece of writing by thinking about the organization of it. So let's talk about the major parts of a critical literary analysis. And we're going to talk very broadly here about introduction, body, and conclusion. Remember that those don't necessarily need to be, one paragraph of each or a 5-paragraph essay, which I know a lot of us had to write in high school. We're not talking about number of paragraphs. What we're talking about are the things that need to be achieved over the course of the essay, and generally speaking, the order in which they would be achieved. So let's start with what has to happen in an introduction. First, you need to introduce the text and the author that you've chosen to look at based on the assignment sheet, which one you've chosen, and give a brief summary. And I can't emphasize brief enough. 1 sentence would be good, maybe 2. If you go more than that, you're giving me too much summary. So keep it brief, just to remind us of where we are, what we're talking about, but make sure you introduce the text and the author up front. I would say do that in the first sentence. Introduce the literary device or element you'll analyze. If you've chosen a question from the assignment sheet that the question you're going to answer, but what element are you looking at? Are you looking at tone? Are you looking at setting or voice or whatever it may be? Let us know what it is you're going to be analyzing. And then present a clear, arguable, and specific thesis statement that makes a claim about the text's use of the literary device or element. You can also think about it as answering the questions that are on the assignment sheet, depending on which one you've chosen. You're going to make it clear and arguable. So, not just a statement of fact about the text. And be specific. Because remember, we're looking at not just that this literary device or element is used in the piece. We're talking about how it is and why it is. So we want to get pretty specific there. That's really the things I want in an introduction. We don't want to go much more than that in a piece this brief. But we want to make sure we do a good job of these things. And then we go into the body. The body is where you introduce supporting points to prove your thesis. So notice here, when we've written a lot of 5-paragraph essays, that kind of format, we're probably used to listing all of our reasons for supporting our thesis in the thesis itself, right? In the introduction, we say, this is true because blank, 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 and blank. We don't want to do that here. You want to make the claim and then use your supporting points, the reasons why, the because reasons. Those come in the essay's body. You don't want to give those away up front. That's the work of the body. So here you would start to talk about why you support your thesis. And then you would support these points with quotes and specific examples from the text. Remember to put quotation marks around any exact wording you're taking from the text, and to be citing either way, whether you're summarizing, paraphrasing, or quoting. We need to make sure we cite where that information comes from. But you can use a specific example or use a specific quote. I'm going to expect textual support from the text for every supporting point you make. You also need to explain how these examples support your overall thesis. I may not immediately make the connections that you do, so it's your job as the writer to make those connections for me so I can follow your logic. Sometimes there can be this sense when you get an assignment that the teacher has some answer they want and they expect you to land on that. And if you don't get the exact answer they wanted, then it's not right. I want to be clear that the questions I've asked you are all open for a variety of answers. What I'm asking you to do is make a case for your answer. It doesn't matter whether you and I would answer the question in the same way. What matters is if I can follow the logic for how you answered the question the way you did, and have you supported it with the text. If you can support it with the text and your logic makes sense, that's the goal. So you want to make sure you're explaining how the examples support the overall thesis. And with the conclusion, we do not want summary. We do not want to repeat what you've already said. Instead, we want to explain why this use of this device or element matters to our understanding of this work or the detective genre as a whole. So depending on which question you've answered, you want to take a look at either the entire work, not just that one element you were focused on, or the detective genre as a whole. Think of it as a so what. Why does this matter? What are we going to take from this that will help us better understand this text or detective genre as a whole or the golden age as a whole? Help us zoom out to focus on a larger context than just this one specific question or angle you've been analyzing. So that's what we want in a conclusion. Now, let's be clear again. We've said these things before, but let's be clear again. What is not a critical literary analysis? It is not a summary of the story. I have read the story, so you do not need to tell me what happened in it. You want to avoid giving me too much summary, and we'll say more about what that means in a second. It is not an essay on the story's relevance to your life. I mean, I hope that none of us have, murder cases as relevance, but it's not about finding, oh, this reminds me of this time that something happened to me, or this is personal to me because I can relate in this way. That is not relevant here. It can be relevant elsewhere in other conversations, but it's not relevant in this assignment. It is not a response essay where you judge the merits of the text overall. So it's not where you say, this is why this is an important book, or this is why it's not. That's not what we do. We're not responding to whether the text is a good one or not. It's not a book report where you are just illustrating that you've read it and then giving it a thumbs up or thumbs down. And it's not a random collection of quotes from the text either. So since there's such a big distinction between summary and analysis, and that matters so much for this assignment, let's look at, again, what summary is versus analysis. So a summary is the main ideas of the text in your own words. It's like a synopsis, that little paragraph that might come on the back of a book or the description of a film, like what's the main ideas, what's it about. But in that case, we're only getting things that come from the text. We're only getting information that comes from the text. So essentially, anyone who saw the movie or read the book would know all of that information. That's what a summary is. If you and I both saw the same movie, then our summaries would involve only information that the other one already knew. And that if you didn't know it, then by seeing the movie or reading the book, you would then know it. That's only information that comes from the text. Summaries don't express opinion or judgment of the text. Because again, it's only information that comes from the text itself. So we don't talk about our judgment of the text or our opinions on the text. That summary is just the facts. So here's an example. In the Shakespeare play Romeo and Juliet, two teenagers from warring families fall in love and eventually commit suicide. Sorry if I spoiled it for you. That's how Romeo and Juliet ends. But as you see there, anyone who's read the play, seen it performed, watched the movies, any of that, if you are familiar, if you've consumed it in any way, then you know those facts. Those are just facts from the story. They don't change depending on who's telling them. They're just the same because that's the facts. That's what summary is. Analysis, on the other hand, is an interpretation of specific elements within a text. So we're interpreting them. We're going beyond the ideas of the text. We are drawing new conclusions based off of the text. The analysis would include quotes and examples from the text to support your own ideas about it. So you and I could see the same movie and have different analysis about it. We'd use the same, we'd use the text as evidence. We might even use the same quotes to prove different points. But the text itself would be support for the claims we're making. And it is going to make an argument about the text. So it is going to have an arguable claim that, again, somebody could be exposed to the text and not reach that same conclusion. So here's an example. Shakespeare uses the tragic love story in Romeo and Juliet to illustrate the futility of men's efforts to change their fate. So here I'm taking the facts of the story and I'm making a claim about the theme at play here. It's about the futility of men's efforts to change their fate. You could easily read Romeo and Juliet and not think that's what the play is about. But I'm going to build that argument based on, quotes from the play, specific examples, and then I'm going to explain how those examples support my claim. That's the difference between analysis and summary. Generally speaking, literary analyses should be roughly 90% analysis and only 10% summary. It's really rough there, but what you want to think about is summary should be done in the smallest of doses. Our assignment's relatively short, so you don't want to spend much time on summary at all. I would think no more than one, maybe two sentences in a row that tell us things only the book or text could tell us, just straight summary. Everything else should be analysis. And that's just a general rule of thumb, 90% analysis, only 10% summary. After you have a draft of it, you may want to identify all of the sentences that you see as summary or parts of sentences, count up the words that are in those sections and see if it's more than 10% of the word count overall. That could be a way that could tell you that you're, if it's 11%, fine, but if it's 40%, well, then that tells you you're doing way more summary than you need to for this assignment. All right, let's talk about some critical literary analyses, do's and don'ts. Do include a clear, specific, and arguable thesis statement that makes a claim in response to your chosen prompt. Remember, you're choosing a prompt, make a claim that is in response to that specific prompt. Make sure you're sticking to that specific prompt. Don't construct a thesis that merely makes an observation about the text. So if you said Agatha Christie uses a large cast of characters, that's just a fact. That's true. And so that's not an arguable thesis. That's just an observation about it. You also want to avoid ones that just have, opinions, unsupported feelings about the text. Agatha Christie wrote a terrible book. I hate this book. That's not a thesis either. You could, it's an opinion, but it's not a supported textual claim, which is what we want. It also isn't responding to any of the prompts, but that's a side note. Do use quotes and specific examples to support your claims. Make sure that each quote is earning its place, because we really don't need more than one quote to do the same thing, right? If you have two quotes that are showing us supporting the same point in the same way, we don't need both of them. But we do need quotes and specific examples to support every claim you have. As I just said, don't include more than two sentences in a row of summary. Again, that's just a general rule of thumb. Sometimes even two is too many, but general rule of thumb. Do sandwich quotes. You may remember this from your 1102 classes or other courses where you think about how to integrate quotes. You want to follow this general structure whenever you're integrating a quote, particularly bigger quotes, right? If you're only using one or two words and working them in with quotation marks into your own sentence, this may not be necessary. But if you're giving us a full sentence of quotes or something that's more substantial, you want to introduce the point you're trying to make, then give the quote to illustrate the point, and then interpret or explain how the quote or example supports your claim. Introduce, illustrate, interpret. The 3 I's there. Remember, your brain and my brain don't work exactly the same. My brain and anybody else's brain, your brain and everybody in the room, we all have different brains, right? They all work a little bit differently. They're going to draw connections based on our own experiences and viewpoints. So we can't assume that that their brain's going to follow the same path that ours does. So it's your job to draw this out, introduce, illustrate, and interpret when you're using evidence. That way we can follow your logic, even if that's not where our brains would have gone ourselves. Don't repeat yourself in the conclusion. Use the final paragraph to help us understand why this analysis matters to the story or the genre as a whole. Again, don't summarize in the conclusion. A conclusion that only tells us things we already know, that doesn't do us any good. Here we're looking at how this might matter on a larger scale. Do use transitions and topic sentences to draw connections between paragraphs. Help us follow the logic there. Don't simply compliment the author on doing a good job at something or criticize them for a bad job. Instead, consider how and to what effect they use the chosen device or element that you're analyzing. All of these people, every text we've read, the person who wrote it did a good enough job to be published and to have their stuff read today. So let's just take that as a given. We don't need to go, make that argument. What we're trying to look at is not whether the piece is good or not, whether they're good or not. We're trying to look at how certain elements are being used and how it fits in to the larger context of what we're talking about. Do use present tense verbs to refer to the events within the story, things that happen within the story. Well, we're going to talk about them in present tense. It's called historical present. It's like as if anytime you open the book or story, the events are still unfolding. So we see it as present tense. Don't use first person pronouns, I, me, my, our, us, we, or second person pronouns, the you and your, anywhere in the essay. You're not talking about yourself. You're not talking about me. We're talking about the text. So that's what we want to stay focused on. Do introduce the author and title of the work at the beginning. Again, I think that should happen in the first sentence. We don't have enough space to get much broader than that. So you want to start right away focused on this author and title. After the first time, you can abbreviate the title. So if you're using, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd is a long title. So you can say Roger Ackroyd or The Murder or, however it is, as long as you're consistent. And after that first time, you can also refer to the author by their last name. Remember, we are not calling people by their first names in writing because that's not how we show respect. So you can say the full name the first time, Edgar Allan Poe, and then from there on out, you can call him Poe or whatever it may be, whatever author you're working with. So keep that in mind. Their last name is how we show respect. All right. So these are our do's and don'ts, our tips. We're going to use those little gray cells. Remember the analysis, our brains working through drawing connections just like the detectives we've been reading. And we're going to analyze in order to reach a conclusion. As always, let me know if you have any questions as you're working on this. And I look forward to seeing what you come up with. All right, bye.